This happened about 2 years ago, shortly after I moved into my first apartment on my own. I'd been working at a corporate firm for a few years, and after getting a decent raise, I finally decided to move out of the tiny apartment I'd been renting and get something nicer. The building was fairly new. It had only been finished that year, and most of the apartments had already been sold, although there were still a few empty units scattered throughout the building. Mine was on the 6th floor. I'd only been living there for about a week when this happened. That night, some coworkers and I went out for dinner after work. I got home sometime around 11:30. By then, the building was completely quiet. I got out of the elevator and started walking down the hallway toward my apartment. As I reached my door and pulled my keys out, I heard something from the apartment directly beside mine. Click. Then a scraping sound. Then another click. I stopped. It sounded exactly like someone was trying to unlock the door, except the sound was coming from the other side. Someone inside the apartment was trying different keys in the lock. At first, I assumed whoever lived there had somehow locked themselves inside. I walked over and knocked. Hello? The sound immediately stopped. I waited. Nothing. I knocked again. Is everything okay? Still no response. That's when I remembered something. I'd never seen anyone entering or leaving that apartment. Not once. I started wondering if someone had broken in. I didn't want to open anything myself, so I called the building secretary. Luckily, he lived nearby and was still awake. He came upstairs about 10 minutes later carrying a set of master keys. I explained what I'd heard. He looked at the apartment number and immediately seemed confused. Nobody lives here. What? This unit hasn't been sold yet. I asked if maybe maintenance workers were inside. He shook his head. Not this late. We stood there for a moment looking at the door. I suggested we just call the police. But he seemed more annoyed than scared. He said there had been contractors in and out of the building recently, and maybe one of them had somehow gotten inside. He unlocked the door. The apartment beyond it was completely dark. There were no lights, no furniture, nothing. He turned on the flashlight on his phone. I'll check. I told him I didn't think that was a good idea. He laughed and said he'd only be a minute. I stayed in the hallway. From where I stood, I could see part of the living room. He walked through it and disappeared down a short hallway toward the bedrooms. I heard him open one door, then another. After that, nothing. Maybe 2 minutes passed. I called his name, no response. I called again, louder this time, still nothing. Then I heard music. It was coming from somewhere inside the apartment. Piano music. Just a few slow notes at first, then a simple melody. I remember staring through that open doorway, trying to understand what I was hearing. The secretary had specifically told me the apartment was empty. There wasn't even supposed to be furniture inside. And yet somewhere beyond that dark hallway, a piano was playing. I called his name again. Nothing. There was absolutely no chance I was going inside after him. I backed away from the door and called emergency services. I stayed in the hallway until the police arrived. By then, the piano had stopped. 2 officers went inside while I waited near the elevator. A few minutes later, one of them came back out. He asked me, "Where's the man you said went inside?" I pointed toward the apartment. He didn't come back out. The officer looked at his partner. Then they searched again. Every bedroom, every closet, the bathroom, the kitchen, even the balcony. Nothing. There was no other entrance. The balcony was 6 floors above the ground. Every window was closed. The secretary was simply gone. Eventually, they allowed me to step inside. That's when I noticed the smell. Paint. Strong, fresh paint. The kind of smell you get when a room has just been painted. One of the officers noticed it too. He touched the wall near the hallway. When he pulled his hand away, there was white paint on his glove. The wall was wet. I told him that didn't make sense. The building had been completed before I'd moved in. The next morning, management confirmed something even stranger. That particular apartment had been painted almost 2 months earlier. There hadn't been any painting scheduled that week. There wasn't supposed to be anyone inside at all. The police searched the building. They checked the stairwells, parking garage, roof, security footage. They questioned residents. Nothing. The secretary's phone was eventually found inside the apartment near the hallway, but there was no sign of him. I didn't sleep in my apartment that night. Actually, I barely slept at all. The following morning, I returned with my brother to pack some clothes. Police tape had been placed across the apartment next door. I had already decided I was going to stay with him for a while. We packed one suitcase, and I called the elevator. While we were waiting, I looked toward the apartment. For a few seconds, nothing happened. Then, from behind the police-taped door, click, I froze, scrape. Then, click. The exact same sound I'd heard the first night. Someone on the other side was trying keys in the lock. My brother asked why I'd gone pale. I didn't answer. The elevator doors opened. I got inside and told him we were leaving. I moved out permanently not long afterward. As far as I know, the secretary was never found. I don't know what was inside that apartment. I don't know where the piano music came from, and I definitely can't explain why walls painted 2 months earlier were suddenly wet again. But the part that still bothers me most isn't any of that. It's remembering that first night. Before I knocked on the door, someone had been trying desperately to unlock it. At the time, I assumed they were trying to get out. After what happened to the secretary, I'm not sure anymore. Maybe they were trying to keep something from getting in. My name is Emma, and this happened when I was 21. I had moved to a small town for college and rented a little house about 15 minutes outside the city. It wasn't anything special, just a small 2-bedroom house with a backyard, an old roof, and a long driveway. The first few weeks were completely normal. I went to college during the day, came home in the evening, cooked something, studied for a while, and went to sleep. I lived alone, but I actually liked it. Then, about a month after moving in, I started hearing footsteps on my roof. The first time I woke up around 2 in the morning, thud. Then another. Thud. Thud. Slow footsteps moving across the roof above my bedroom. I sat up in bed and listened. At first I thought it was an animal, maybe a raccoon, maybe a large cat. I didn't think much of it, but the next night, it happened again. And the night after that, always late at night, always sounding like someone walking slowly across the roof. Eventually I started checking the windows whenever I heard them. I never saw anything. One morning I told my closest friend, Lily, about it. She laughed. "You're probably just hearing the house settling." "I know what a house sounds like." She smiled. "Then maybe it's an animal." I didn't argue, but I was completely sure it wasn't. There was something about the sound that made it different. It sounded like footsteps. 2 feet. Slow and deliberate. And every time I checked, nothing was there. After a while, I stopped telling people about it because I started feeling stupid. Until one weekend when Lily came over to stay the night. We spent the evening watching movies, ordering food, and talking about college. For the first time in weeks, I completely forgot about the footsteps. Around midnight, we went upstairs and got ready for bed. We were talking in my bedroom when suddenly, thud. We both stopped. Another step, thud. Lily looked at me. I didn't say anything. Another step crossed the roof. She whispered, "Is that what you've been hearing?" I nodded. She got out of bed. We both stood there listening. The footsteps continued, slowly moving across the roof. Then they stopped. For a few seconds, there was complete silence. Lily whispered, "Maybe we should check." We left the bedroom and walked into the hallway. The moment we reached the stairs, thud. The footsteps moved directly above us. We stopped. So did they. Lily looked at me. Then we slowly walked toward the kitchen. The footsteps moved above the kitchen. We stopped. They stopped. I felt my stomach drop. We moved back toward the hallway. The footsteps followed us, not randomly, not in the same direction as before. They were moving directly above wherever we were standing. Lily grabbed my arm. "How's it doing that?" I didn't answer. We slowly walked back into my bedroom. The footsteps followed us, then stopped directly above the bedroom. We both stood completely still. For the first time, Lily looked genuinely frightened. She whispered, "It knows where we are." That's when she pulled out her phone and called 911. The dispatcher told us officers were on the way, but because we lived outside the main part of town, it could take around 10 or 15 minutes. 10 minutes had never sounded so long. We didn't want to stay in the bedroom. If someone was actually on the roof, we didn't know whether they could get inside. We checked downstairs and found the bathroom. It had a solid door with a lock. We went inside, locked it, then locked the second bathroom door behind us. We sat on the floor with the lights off. For several minutes, nothing happened. Then we heard the front door open. Both of us froze. Someone had entered the house. I could hear footsteps downstairs. Slow footsteps. They moved through the living room. Then the kitchen. Something scraped against the floor. A cabinet opened, then closed. Neither of us spoke. Lily slowly reached for the bathroom door handle. I grabbed her wrist. She looked at me. I shook my head. We didn't know who was outside. We didn't know if they knew we were hiding there. The footsteps moved into the hallway, then stopped. We waited. A few seconds passed, then the footsteps continued. They moved toward the stairs, then silence. We stayed locked inside that bathroom for what felt like forever. Finally, we heard voices. "Police, is anyone inside?" Lily immediately started crying. We unlocked the door and came out. 3 officers were standing downstairs. We explained everything. They searched the entire house, every room, every closet, the attic, the backyard. Then one officer went onto the roof. Nothing, no person, no animal, no footprints, no obvious way anyone could have gotten inside. The front door hadn't been damaged. None of the windows were broken. There was simply nobody there. Before leaving, one of the officers told us they would increase patrols around the neighborhood for the next few nights. Lily stayed with me that night. I barely slept. The next morning, I started looking for another place to live. I didn't care if I lost my security deposit. 2 weeks later, I moved into an apartment closer to campus. And strangely, the footsteps stopped. Completely. I lived there for almost 2 years and never heard anything unusual. Lily still jokes that it was probably an animal on the roof. Maybe she's right. Maybe I spent weeks frightening myself over something completely ordinary. But there is one thing I can't explain. Animals don't normally stop moving when you stop moving, and whatever was walking across my roof that night followed us from room to room. I've lived in 3 different places since then. I've never heard those footsteps again. But whenever I hear something moving above my ceiling late at night, I still stop whatever I'm doing and listen, just to make sure it's not following me again. My name is Sarah, and this happened during my second year of college. At the time, I was making some extra money by house sitting for people in my neighborhood. One couple I knew was going out of town for a week and asked if I could stay at their house while they were gone. The house was large, quiet, and located a little outside town. They had a dog named Max, so they didn't want to leave him alone for several days. When they showed me around the house, everything seemed completely normal. The wife showed me where the dog food was, gave me the Wi-Fi password, and explained how to lock the doors at night. Before they left, her husband gave me one last instruction. He pointed toward a door underneath the staircase. The basement. He handed me a key. "Don't go down there." I laughed. "Okay, why?" He hesitated for a moment, then he said, "There's nothing you need down there." I nodded. That was it. They left around noon. For the first 2 nights, nothing happened. I fed Max, watched television, studied, and went to bed. Then, on the 3rd night, I woke up around 2:13 a.m. I heard a knock. I sat up. Another knock. It sounded like someone knocking on a wooden door. I listened carefully. It was coming from downstairs, specifically from the basement door. I told myself it was probably the house settling. Then came 2 more knocks. Knock, knock. I stayed in bed. After a few minutes, everything became quiet again. The next morning, I almost forgot about it, until I noticed Max standing in front of the basement door. He wasn't barking, he was just staring at it. I called him. He didn't move. I walked over and touched his collar. He immediately turned around and followed me into the kitchen. I didn't think much about it. That evening, I called the homeowners just to check in. I casually mentioned the knocking. There was a long silence on the phone. Then the husband asked, "Did you open the basement door?" "No." "Good." I laughed nervously. "Why?" He didn't answer directly. He just said, "You're probably not going to hear it again." I thought that was strange, but I didn't push him. The next night, I heard it again. This time it was louder. Knock. A pause. Knock. Another pause. Knock. I sat on the edge of my bed listening. Then I heard something that made my stomach drop. Someone whispered my name. "Sarah." I froze. The voice sounded like the homeowner. I grabbed my phone and called him immediately. He answered after a few rings. "Hello?" I whispered. "Did you just call my name?" There was silence. Then he asked, "Where are you?" "In the bedroom." He sounded genuinely confused. "I'm in a hotel in Colorado." I didn't say anything. Then he asked something that I still remember. "Did you hear the knocking again?" I asked him what was going on. He didn't want to explain over the phone. Eventually, he told me the basement had belonged to his older brother many years ago. His brother had disappeared. No one ever found out what happened to him. After that, strange things started happening around the basement. He told me his family eventually stopped using it. I asked him why they hadn't told me any of this before leaving. He apologized. He said he didn't want to scare me. I told him I was leaving in the morning. He agreed, but I never made it to morning. Around 2 a.m., the knocking started again. Except this time, it wasn't coming from the basement, it was coming from the hallway. I sat completely still. Then I heard footsteps. Slow footsteps moving across the downstairs floor. I grabbed my phone and locked my bedroom door. The footsteps stopped outside. I waited. Nothing. Then, knock, knock on my bedroom door. I didn't move. Then I heard the homeowner's voice. "Sarah, open the door." My hands started shaking. I called him. He answered almost immediately. I could hear his breathing. He was still in Colorado. I whispered, "Someone is outside my bedroom." He said, "Don't open the door." Then the voice outside spoke again. This time it sounded exactly like him. "Sarah." I looked at my phone. The homeowner was still on the line. Then the voice outside said, "Why are you calling him?" I stopped breathing. The homeowner heard it too. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Then he told me to call the police. I did. I stayed locked inside my bedroom until they arrived. When the officers entered the house, everything was silent. They searched every room. Nobody was there. The basement was empty. The doors and windows were locked. There was no sign anyone had broken in. One officer eventually came upstairs and told me it was safe to leave the room. As I walked downstairs, I noticed something on the basement floor. There were wet footprints. They started at the bottom of the basement stairs. They crossed the hallway, then continued upstairs. The footprints ended directly outside my bedroom door. There were no footprints going back. The police photographed everything. They couldn't explain where they came from. I left that house that morning and never went back. The homeowners eventually returned from their trip. I don't know what they did with the house after that. I never asked. But there's one thing I still think about. The husband had told me not to open the basement door because of what had happened to his brother. I always assumed he was afraid of something coming out of the basement. Now I'm not so sure, because whatever was walking through that house, it didn't stay downstairs. And whatever left those footprints had already made it upstairs. It just never left footprints on the way back.